we've got different ways to create space. The two primary are hip lift and hip escape. So we need to create either horizontal space or vertical space between us. I need to move that guy. I need to get enough space, especially between my hips and his. So the hip lift, the first one, the idea with hip lift is I'm trying to create as much vertical space as I possibly can. I want his hips, his weight up here away from me, because then I can move underneath it. And the way I'm going to do it is this. I'm going to bring the heels of my feet as close as I can to my butt cheeks. Okay, I've got a knee injury. I've got flexibility issues, whatever. All right, I can only bring my knees here. Okay, that's fine. But I'm trying to bring them as close to my butt cheeks as possible. The closer I come to my butt cheeks, the more arc I'm going to get. So I can't get my feet that close. All right, you're only going to be able to get so much. Okay, cool. You know, it's not you have to do this, otherwise it's no good. No, you do the best you can. Ideally, though, the more you do it, the more you stretch out your body, the more you get used to that. Even people who are not flexible can usually build up over time the ability to come pretty close. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to touch my belly button to the ceiling. I don't care about anything else. Everything else is irrelevant. I'm just going straight up, belly button to the ceiling. And I'm going to drive off the balls of my feet, and I'm going to keep going. When I'm to the top of that arch, the only thing that's touching are the balls of my feet and my shoulder blades. My head is off the ground because actually, for whatever reason, mechanically, and I can't explain it, I just know it's true, if my head's on the ground, I actually inhibit the amount of hip arc. So if I lift my head up and the only thing touching now is my shoulder blade, I can get that extra, maybe only an inch. But we're talking about small increments anyway. An inch might be that extra little thing that I need to go from failure to success. So straight up, that's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to do anything else because now his weight's up here. And then when I drop, I'm going to be ahead of him. And now his weight's still up here, even momentarily, for a microsecond. But now I can do something. So the hip lift is straight up in the air. That's the goal, is to go straight up. People lose that part. It's straight up. One of the things that I've noticed over the past 30 plus years of jiu-jitsu is that the hip lift, in jiu-jitsu terminology, the UPA, is again one of the fundamental things you learn. It's one of the very, very first things you learn in jiu-jitsu. I don't care what academy you come from, what lineage, doesn't matter. You almost always learn that right away. And what I've noticed, it's probably the thing done either the worst or the least. And I think one of the major reasons is because one of the things that jiu-jitsu has, one of the ways it's advanced the past 15, 20 years is we've become much more mobile in our jiu-jitsu. Open guard has become an amazingly varied thing. There are so many different guards out there with just amazing sweeps and attacks, and it's turned people into far more mobile than they ever were in the 70s, 80s, 90s. If you watch any footage from back then, you're like, oh, they're not moving a whole lot. It's much more closed guard, a lot more limited hip movement. So I'm super excited. I'm happy as I possibly can be that the jiu-jitsu has advanced that way. The problem has become, though, is so much of open guard work is propelled by hip escapes. So we get phenomenally graded hip escapes because we're doing them all the time. And the hip lift kind of gets lost in the wake. It's not done enough. And so people forget to do them. And what happens, the worst part is when they do them under stress, when they're rolling, it doesn't work. And it's not because the hip lift doesn't work, it's because they do it poorly. As I said, you're talking about, I'm trying to touch my belly button to the sky, to the ceiling. Well, what I see is basically almost like a goldfish out of the water flopping on the ground. This little hiccup movement. Well, that's not going to move anybody. That's the problem. That's not a hip lift. But because people have forgotten to work it as much and they don't have that kinesthetic perception to go, oh, my hips are not moving to the level it needs to. They go, well, the hip lift's not working. I'm going to do more hip escape. So it's this negative feedback loop of, I do a crappy hip lift, it's not working, so I'm going to do more hip escape, which means I'm doing less hip lift. So when I do it, it's worse and worse, and I get less likely to do it. And that's wrong. The hip lift, I don't want to argue that it's more important than the hip escape. But from a self-defense perspective, especially when you find yourself at an initiative deficit, when you are put on the ground when you don't want to be, you know what? Probably the hip lift is more important, at least in that first initial moment, to get the guy's weight off you. You can have a great hip escape, but if he's so big and he's so flattening you down, you're not moving the hips. I do it all the time. I lock people's hips down all the time when I'm rolling with them. I will completely shut down their ability to use a hip escape. Even in guys my size or bigger, I can lock down their hips and they can't do the hip escape. And if they don't have a hip lift, guess what? They ain't going anywhere. So, not to say you must do hip lifts above all else, but do a lot of them and make sure everyone is done the right way. That's important. And the more I focus on this and the more I look at other jiu-jitsu academies and other people doing it, the more I'm convinced it's not a missing piece, but it's a overlooked piece. So don't be that person. Start your journey right from the beginning, blasting out hip lifts correctly.